Anyway, I'm able to see you, so I'll take the I'll assume that I'm able to see everybody. Okay, so welcome everybody. Uh, Dhaval, I'll be banking on you to give me the thumbs up and the feedback, because I don't know what has happened. I'm not able to see anybody on my screen except you. So there must be some problem with my, you know.
मैं अदिति को ही आपके सामने रख देता हूँ.
Sorry.
मैं अदिति को ही आपके सामने रख देता हूँ सर.
Oh, okay, fine. Yeah. So that would be yeah. I could get some feedback from there.
Hello, Aditi.
Yes, sir.
Hello, Aditi.
Hello, sir.
Hello, Vita. I hope you're able to see me.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So, I was welcoming all of you to this special session. So, if all of you have joined, we could start. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Now, I was sharing the screen. Yeah. And now, I hope you have your notebooks and your pens ready. What we propose to do in today's session is, we would want to quickly go through some of the core ideas that we have in the paper that you had, for study in your final semester. I'm sure all of you would remember that there were certain terms that were given to you. And in fact, some of you made some wonderful presentations also. Aditi, we would want to thank you. You have taken the initiative, you've recorded some videos. So we would want to also share it, with our, fellow class fellows and classmates. So thank you so much, Aditi, for taking pains. And now what we are trying to do, sorry, I didn't get that.
Most welcome, sir.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So keep responding so that I know that I'm still connected. So what we are going to do is today, we would want to, address what are the core ideas of all these literary terms. Okay, now let's begin with classicism. Okay, so I hope my voice is reaching to all of you, right? All of you are able to hear me? Okay. So when you say the word classic, what does the word classic mean? A classic work means a work of high authority. A classic work would mean a literary work belonging to ancient Greece or Rome. A classic work would mean that which is of high quality, in that which is acknowledged, over a period of time as excellent. So classic, the core idea of the word classic, when you say classical literature, or when you say, that this is a classic work, or, when you use, in colloquial speech, these terms, what do we really mean? So classicism means a work of high authority, number one. It is a work which belongs to ancient Greece and Rome, and that which is excellent, that which has been acknowledged as excellent over a period of time, and that it is, of high quality, and that it is having a merit, which transcends the category of space and time. Now, moving on, we would want to, also talk about how, so far as English literature is concerned, how classicism was very strong in France, particularly in the 17th and the 18th centuries. And it is only later that the influence was strongly felt in England around that period. So, coming back, when we are talking of classicism, there are two very important figures that we have to remember. One is Aristotle, and the other, of course, is Horace.
Horace.
Now, moving on, when you're talking of classicism, when you have defined the term, there are certain core ideas, as I was mentioning at the start. You're talking of order, you're talking of rules, regulations, discipline, decorum, all these are, terms, whether it's in terms of classical styles, classical rules, classical conventions, classical modes, you find that, there is something unique about them. So that is essentially the core idea of the term classicism, that anything which is connected with rules, regulation, say for instance, Aristotle's Poetics, that is a classical work. Or take for instance, Horace's Ars Poetica, which talks about the theory of decorum, the theory of decorum, that everything ought to be in order. So all these terms, rules, regulations, order, discipline, decorum, all these are terms, that reveal the classical movement. And that this gets reflected not merely in literature, it is something which is associated with Greco-Roman art, Greco-Roman architecture, it refers to styles, rules, conventions, and modes. So summing up classicism, essentially the core idea of classicism is that which is excellent, which transcends time, place, and order. And that, it is, excellent. It was excellent not for an age, but then it would continue to be excellent for all ages. So, Aditi, I believe that's okay with classicism.
Yes, sir.
Let's now move on to the other term, romanticism. Romanticism, we noted that there were so many definitions. There are, over 11,000 definitions that you have so far as romanticism is concerned. Now, classicism, is, if classicism is one end, the other end is romanticism. So there is, in placing them together, the idea is to ensure that we are able to shift our focus, from classicism to romanticism, which is virtually, as is referred by many critics, it is the antithesis of classicism. Romanticism as such is a literary movement, and there is a shift of movement. There is a shift from the head to the heart, right? There is a shift, from reason to emotion, the head and the heart. What is the centripetal and the centrifugal points as far as reason is concerned? It is the head, right? The centripetal and the centrifugal points as far as emotion is concerned, it is the
heart.
Right? So there is this shift of emphasis, there is this transition that you have, wherein again, you have this shift in sensibility, which took place not merely in Britain, but then it took place throughout Europe, in that period, which is 1770 to 1848. 1770 to 1848, that normally is referred as the period wherein this shift took place, right? And that it was around, with the publication, of course, of the lyrical ballads, right? Remember the 1798, that is a very, very important year wherein the two poets, William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, they joined hands and, redefined poetry. That is something that you are all familiar with. So there is, a prominence in romanticism which is given to emotional matter. Emotion is right at the top, and reason is, in terms of positioning, it is not at the same footing. It's emotion which is right at the top. So this called in for a kind of liberalism in literature. What would be the focal points? If somebody were to ask you, what are the focal points? What are the core ideas of romanticism? As in classicism, we said order, discipline, decorum. So here in romanticism, the focal points would be imagination, right? Imagination, in fact, emotion, imagination, emotion, freedom. These are IEF. If you would want to put a formula for that, imagination, emotion, and freedom. These are the focal points of romanticism. It stresses upon, what is the stress of romanticism? The stress of romanticism is self-expression. And, it goes hand in hand with the idea that every individual is unique. Every individual, has his own methodology for communicating, for revealing, his self. And that, this shift, is seen in the very famous statement that you have, in the lyrical ballads, that a poet is a man speaking to men. There is this focus on individuality, that if classicism stressed on objectivity, we could say that romanticism stressed upon subjectivity. So I think now we could make, since we have had, something we have discussed about classicism, we've spoken about romanticism. If we were to make a comparative study, you could say that classicism believes in reason, right? Classicism has faith in reason, while romanticism has faith in the senses, faith in the feelings, faith in imagination, emotions. Very good. Now, moving, to the second point, you find that there is, the interest of classical literature is primarily in the urban society. The urban society, the well-off, you don't find classicism dealing with the poor people. All the characters that you have, they're high placed in the society. So it deals, the interest of classicism is with the urban society. On the other hand, in romanticism, the interest is in the rural, in the natural, right? The interest of the romantic poets is in the rural and natural. Again, the third idea would be that classicism advocated impersonal poetry, what we just spoke a second ago, objective poetry. While romanticism said that no, we would want to have subjective poetry. There was something, of the scientific and the mundane, the scientific approach that the classicists had. While, the romantics were interested in the mysterious, to go, as Keats says, to go where no man has ever gone before, to strive, as Tennyson puts it later, much later, to strive, to seek, to find, that never to yield. So one is, scientific, mundane, the other is mysterious and infinite. And you find this, in romantic. So this is, a kind of a comparison that we have between classicism and romanticism. Now, moving, on, there are around 5 I's which are very important in romanticism. I've already spoken about imagination, right? The 5 I's, you could again have this formula, you could take it down. Imagination, idealism, the romantics were idealists. Intuition is the third I. Imagination, idealism, they in fact, they were moving towards, an ideal, world, your own vision, the vision of the individual was much more important, subjective, ideology, and then intuition, and then inspiration, right? Intuition, inspiration, and finally, individuality. This shift, if God was the center during the medieval times, in the romantic times, man became the center. So imagination, the 5 I's, if we could revise, would be imagination,
idealism,
intuition,
inspiration, and individuality.
Let's now move to the third, ism that we have studied. And that third is a favorite with all of you. there is feminism.
Feminism.
Feminism now is again a radical notion. The core idea behind feminism is to emphasize that women are also people. Women are not commodities. Women cannot be objectified. They are not a mat. They're not a mat to be stepped upon. But then women are people. And this, first wave of feminism that you have, which of course begins with that wonderful work that you have by Mary Wollstonecraft, A Vindication of the Rights of Women. You find that during the 19th and the 20th century, you find that there's a lot of activity. We begin, of course, with the 18th century, the later part of the 18th century. You have Margaret Fuller, Ellen Showalter, and all these very important names coming up. But then what I would want all of you to remember is that, this movement, primarily was, limited to perhaps the United States of America and the United Kingdom. And that, so far as the Indian context is concerned, this is something that was already a part of the Indian cultural milieu, giving respect to women, and therefore, although you have literature, which talks about also feminism, but then that is something different in the Gujarat, in the context of Gujarat and India. But then, so far as our study of the first wave of feminism is concerned, it was limited to the United Kingdom and the United States of America, wherein they spoke primarily, what were the core ideas? They spoke of equality. Equality, there is, in terms of marriage, the rights, so far as the rights are concerned, there has to be equality there. Parenting, property, they call it MPP, marriage, parenting, and property rights. The core word being rights. It's all about rights and rights. Now, in the 19th century, at the end, towards the end of the 19th century, in the beginning of the 20th century, we noticed that it became almost a political movement. It was associated with power. Women wanted positions, political positions, and perhaps in all the representative forms of the society. There is the suffrage movement. Perhaps I would, ask my TY students to remember the suffrage, the concept of, this, the right to vote. This right to vote that women got. And that, you had critics like Ellen Showalter talking about, how everything goes back to the individual women, and that they have their own rights. They've got their biological rights, they've got their economic rights, and that in a sense, we could say that the first wave of feminism was driven by a combination of social and economic forces, and that hand in hand. The feminists, they were involved in this campaign to vote, the right to vote, and the desire for equality, that there shouldn't be any imbalance, so far as, the political, economic, and social placement of men and women are concerned. Now, taking stock of what we had studied earlier, let's move on to the second wave of feminism, that we have in the 19th century, which of course, spoke about. I'm sure you would remember those four very important terms that you use, feminism, critiques feminism, questions feminism,
challenges,
and finally it, there is attacks. Yeah, that's right. Wonderful. So, so this was that period, 1960s, when the second wave of feminism came about, and this is a remarkable movement, in fact, in human history, which called for to the end of patriarchy. It was this was the term that came about. People, were laying a lot of emphasis. There was a lot of rethink that, these ideologies, cannot be perpetrated for long. And that, women, wanted to become active. They became active in politics, and they won the right to university education. That's very important. That education shouldn't be again restricted to just the male people, the male-dominated society, patriarchy. But then even women have the right to university education. They will make a career, and they'll also have the right. If they're not having the they have the right to. So suddenly, women became voting, and they started proving that they are different from men. So, what is the core idea there? The core ideas, you could put it, matter of factly, gender inequality. All these, they're attacking a whole male notion, speaking of outdated orthodox notions, all that kind of inequality. It focuses on gender, politics, and power relations. It's all about power. You see, patriarchy was all about sessions in the class. If you go to the northeastern part, if you go to Nagaland, for instance, you'd find that you have a matriarchal society. So the power is in the hands of the women there. There's a critiquing of social and political relations, and there is a focus now. If we said that man was the focus in Romanticism, you could say that in feminism the focus is women, her interest, and her rights. So now what we have done so far, Aditi and all of our friends who have joined us, we have taken stock of classicism, right? We have taken stock of romanticism and then feminism. Now let's move to something which would interest all of you, modernism. Let's take up modernism for study there. And modernism, what does it mean to be a modern? How do you define the term? Now, M.H. Abrahams, that's a wonderful work that we have. There's a very beautiful definition that M.H. Abrahams himself gives, that there are new and distinctive features that you have. So, for a subject, choice of subject is concerned, forms, concepts, and the style of literature, in the early decades and the present century, there is, a difference. There is something unique. There is something distinctive that you have. Modern, was a period of innovation. A lot of innovations took place here. Modernism, all that, the craft that you have, and that, in poetry particularly, you find that this was also known as a period of disillusionment. People were disillusioned. There were a lot of wars taking place, particularly the First World War, the Second World War, and that, there was, this disillusionment, with life and living. And that, of course, brought about this trend called as anti-realism. Anti-realism, there is, you have also, symbolism. Some of these are offshoots of modernism that you have. But then the prominent, among the prominent poets that you have Robert Bridges. Remember, that name is associated with Gerard Manley Hopkins. Remember, we discussed him, how he was responsible, what a friend he was, and how he rescued the collection of poems which were thrown into the sea, and how following his death, Robert Bridges, he was again a prominent modern poet. You had John Mansfield, William Butler Yeats. When you're talking about modernism, you cannot forget William Butler Yeats, Robert Brooke, T.S. Eliot. W.H. Auden, some of the poems that you studied. Remember the Shield of Achilles,
Achilles.
looking backward and all. Stephen Spender, Dylan Thomas, these were among the poets. And among the novelists, of course, you had H.G. Wells, Joseph Conrad, D.H. Lawrence, remember D.H. Lawrence, Aldous Huxley, James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, and when you're talking about poets and novelists, we cannot forget T.S. Eliot as a dramatist, Galsworthy, Sino Casey, and again the contribution of William Butler Yeats as a dramatist too. So he had multiple roles to play. And now modernism, one thing that we have to remember that this ism gave birth to a number of critical theories. A number of theories like semiotics, linguistics and literary criticism, Russian formalism, objective correlative. Remember that concept, the theory of objective correlative given by T.S. Eliot, new criticism, I.A. Richards, right? The language of paradox, archetypal criticism, all these, critical theories, were offshoots of this ism called as modernism.
Modernism.
Now, from modernism, you have another, offshoot coming up, which we call as which is referred as postmodernism. And this emerged as an area of academic study somewhere in the 1980s. In the 1980s, and that this ism is not just limited to literature. What we need to remember is that all the isms that we have spoken, they're not literary or literature specific. They are transcendental. In fact, they are to be studied across disciplines. So similarly, postmodernism, is inclusive of architecture, music, literature, fashion, technology, film, all these wide varieties of concepts are accommodated in this term, postmodernism, and it emerged as a field of academic study somewhere in the 1980s. And that, of course, goes on to reconsider. It's not correct, I would say, to see that postmodernism is just an offshoot of modernism. There are a number of things which are reconsidered. There is a re-estimate of some of the modernist assumptions about culture, identity, history, and language. These are four areas which are, rethought, in postmodernism: culture, identity, history, and language. And when we were talking about structuralism and post-structuralism, you would remember that the binaries. We tended to look upon the world with the binaries and classifications of black or white, straight or gay or male or female. So these binaries, where in fact they are say monodimensional in character, and that the world cannot be just bracketed in these modes. So coming back to postmodernism, it started with architecture. I'm coming to the core points, and I think this would be the last. We'll take the last few points of this term. Of this concept, that postmodernism is characterized by what? So number one would be eclecticism. Eclecticism. E-C-L-E-C-T-I-C-I-S-M. Eclecticism. What is eclecticism? You tend to draw from a number of sources. There is, you take something from architecture, music. So postmodernist style is eclectic in character. So if modernism was, talking about moving straight and in order, postmodernism believes in digressing, something what you have in James Joyce's stream of consciousness technique, right? That stream of consciousness technique and the idea of digression, I believe, could go in hand. Or I'm sure something that you're all very good at, collage. You know how to prepare a collage? A collage is what you cut newspaper cuttings. You have newspaper cuttings, and then you put it on a A4 size of paper, and then you, from that collection of clippings that you have, you create a story. So postmodernism is like a collage. Okay, have you got that collage? Okay, great. And then there is something of the pastiche and the irony, which is characterized, which forms a part of postmodernism. So Dhaval, if you're with me, hello, hello Dhaval,
Yes,
hello
sir.
Dhaval.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I believe we are. How many minutes do we have now?
Sir, 3 minutes.
So, can we have a few questions now? So we could take up a few questions, so before and maybe next week we could continue, or maybe after a couple of days as is convenient. So I would request you to please put me in front of all the students, so that I could have a look at them, and that we could spare a little time for discussion.
Okay,
Would
sir.
that be okay? Hello, everybody. I believe all our friends. Finally having the gallery view. And yeah, Kajal. Hello, Kajal. How are you?
Hi, sir. Sir,
Yeah,
fine.
good. Parul is there. Okay, wonderful. So, Kajal, did you listen to the lecture?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you recall what all we studied? Did you recall? We have it's quite difficult time. So we thought that this criticism is going to be useful to you. Dhaval, please mute everybody. They could
Hello.
Yeah. So what I was mentioning is, hello,
Okay.
are you getting my voice now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you see, the reason why we wanted to have the FI and the SY students also was that, criticism is something which is going to be a part of your study in the next couple of years. So it's equally important, for all of you to be familiar with some of these terms. And therefore, we thought that, all of you, if you could join the TY session, we have studied today something of classicism, romanticism, and then we moved on to feminism, and finally modernism. And we are focusing on the core ideas. Maybe in the next session, we will take up another 4 concepts. But then I'll be happy to have your inputs, your feedback, your response. Hello, Shruti. I'm so happy to see you. We all remember Shruti. Dhaval, if you could unmute Shruti.
Okay. 1 minute, sir. Please, sir. Okay.
Hello,
Hello,
Shruti.
sir.
Yeah, how
Hello,
are
sir.
you?
I'm fine, sir. How are you?
We all remember, that wonderful scene you performed, the Macbeth, Lady Macbeth,
Yes, sir.
all the perfumes of Arabia would not sweeten this little hand. That was a wonderful presentation. So, did you listen all
Thank you
through?
so much,
Uh,
sir. Yes, sir.
yeah,
Yes,
and
sir.
is there anything that you would like to share? You'd like to give your feedback?
It was a interesting class because